Yes, thank you for the introduction and good afternoon, everyone. So this is the second presentation I'm making today, and I believe it's great honor for me to have this opportunity to talk with you twice about such important topic, which is data backup. But with this presentation, except best security practices, I would like also to share with you some ransomware history. So I will just make quick introduction of myself just to let you know who am I and why I'm going to talk about such topics like data backup or security. So one more time, I'm Grzegorz, but I believe you won't be able to repeat my name, so that's why I used to introduce myself just as Greg. I'm extreme sports lover. I do ride downhill mountain bike for many years, and here you can see me even on the picture, but I'm also big fan of making presentations about important but sometimes boring topics, which is data backup and security. But in my profession, I've got over a decade of experience with data backup, security, and in general, security industry and market. So I've started my career as a support manager. It learned me what problems users are facing with their data, with backup solutions, with disaster recovery. After that, I became mobile developer, so I pretty well understand the perspective of developers, the problems they are dealing with daily. After that, I became pre-sales engineer because, as they said in my company, I'm the person who can explain unexplainable things to non-tech people. So then I became also product development manager because I pretty well understand their needs, so I know how to craft the product. And at the end, I became chief of R&D, so I know a lot about responsibility and management. So I believe I'm the right person to talk about data backup and the company I'm working for. In few words, to make long story short, we are backup service provider and software producer with more than 13 years of experience on the market. We are available, I believe, almost on all countries around the world. We are protecting let's say infrastructure. We are covering infrastructure backup like endpoints, servers, virtual environments, and you name it. But on the other hand, our other branch is Git Protect, which I'm going to talk about today because this branch is especially focused on DevOps ecosystem protection like GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, Jira, and I hope in future there will be more and more services that we can cover with our solution. But let's start with ransomware and some alarming statistics. But before we head directly into the statistics, let's answer the question, what ransomware is. Obviously, this is some kind of malware, but not every malware is a ransomware. First of all, ransomware somehow in some way must block access to your data or maybe to the systems, because I don't know if it was on the entire world, but a few years ago in Poland there was a lot of malware which displays some message on the computer, on the screen, that your computer has been blocked by the police, by the government, or by the president, and it was one of the easiest ransomwares that you can handle with. But nowadays, usually what ransomware does to block access to your data, it just encrypts them. So that's the first thing. Or another thing what ransomware can do is just to erase your data. In general, you're losing access to your data. After that, ransomware is a kind of malware which forces you to pay demanded ransom. And of course, backup is really great solution to deal with ransomware because you can restore the data directly from the backup. But still, even if you have backup in place, you must be aware on ransomware, because in recent years we can see that it also steals your data. And if you're not going to pay the ransom, those data will be exposed, your company will be compromised. But what even worse, here in European Union we've got GDPR, so if there are some customers' data, for example, stolen, and they will be exposed, then you are not paying the ransom to the hackers, but you have to pay a fine that your data gets exposed. So it's not good deal for you to be affected by the ransomware. And today, of course, I'm not going to tell you how to fight against the ransomware, but I will let you know at least what to do to not lose your data. But let's take a look at the ransomware history, because it's older than you may think. And I don't know, have you ever heard about the first ransomware ever that was developed? Let's say it was 33 years ago, so quite a long time ago. Have you ever heard about AIDS ransomware? Please raise your hand if you heard about it. No one. Okay, so we've got some history to be told. So first of all, ransomware, it was invented in 1989, as you can see on the slide. It was on some healthcare conference. The doctors from the whole world came to this conference, and after that they received a letter with 5 inches floppy disk. And on this floppy disk, there had to be some kind of catalog or something, I don't exactly know, but some medical data that they want to take a look. And once they started this floppy disk, after the computer was infected by the ransomware, but it doesn't appear immediately after inserting the diskette because it was so easy, the floppy disk. So after several computer restarts, it started printing out through the printer the message that you have to pay in some ransom, that some files were encrypted on your computer, and just to get the access you have to pay on some provided banking account. It was pretty easy to deal with because it wasn't real encryption, it just changed the file names and extensions, so you just need to find the proper files, revert their names, revert their extensions, and everything was fine. But it was, to be honest, it was really too early for the real ransomware, because still there were no way to gain the ransom in anonymous way, because all the time we have to give you attackers must give you their banking account, which you have to pay, where you have to pay the ransom, and after that they can give you back access to your data. So once Bitcoin appears on the market, the ransomware grows up immediately, and right now we can talk about those alarming statistics. So first of all, this is average ransom demanded, which was in the third quarter of 2021. And I would like to excuse you that this statistic maybe is not up to date, but I believe the ransom only increased, and I believe still it's demanded way more money than it was in 2021. I didn't update the presentation because I wasn't supposed to make presentation about ransomware today, but another statistic alarming for you I've got, it's more fresh, let's say, but let's take a look at this number. It's really huge, and which company can afford paying such ransom? Sometimes it's dealing with to pay the ransom or to stay on the market, because if we don't pay the ransom, we cannot stay on the market without our data or with our data but exposed. So very often such ransomware attack is just the end for the company. More than 200 million of ransomware cases were discovered in the first half of 2022, and what scares me a lot, those are cases that were reported or somehow discovered. We don't know how many cases were not reported, were not discovered. We know that smaller companies, maybe some personal users, they didn't report the ransomware. Okay, we lost the data, we can somehow deal with that. We can agree that we don't have any more access to those data, and we have to continue. And I believe there are a lot of people, a lot of companies who think in that way, and they didn't report it anywhere. So I believe today the ransomware attacks more often than 1 year ago, and the statistics from my mind, the statistics already says that ransomware hits every 13 seconds. So It's really scary. And another statistic which I'm afraid of is that the most common case, the most common scenario which you get infected by the ransomware is just phishing email. It's not OpenRDP connection, which was for some time the most common reason why you get affected by the ransomware, but right now the most common attack vector still is phishing email, and 2/3 of ransomware infections is done over the phishing email by the dummy user who clicks on the attachment that he shouldn't click into. So let's make something with it, as I used to say, and let's train our employees, our co-workers, our friends that they do not click to any attachments on the emails, and in general do not open email you don't supposed to receive. So if you're not waiting for any email with attachment and you will receive email with attachment, it means that you shouldn't open it. And you may think that it doesn't happen to Git repositories or maybe to Jira or maybe to other DevOps ecosystems, because all the time when we are talking about ransomware, we are talking about your documents on the computer, we are talking maybe on some databases or stuff like this. But such thing also happens to Git repositories, as you can see. So this attack took place, as far as I remember, in 2021. So 2 years ago was one of the first well-described and well-documented ransomware attack. It affected 3 the most common, the most popular Git services like GitHub, GitLab, and of course Bitbucket. It was caused by credential exposure, obviously. So somewhere in public repositories there were found keys to the private ones, and thanks to them, attackers were able to access them to wipe all data, every repository, every commit from those repositories, and after that left only short message that you have pay a nice amount of bitcoins on provided wallet to get back access to your data. And hopefully in most of those cases, service providers like GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket, they were able to recover users' data in this case. But in future, it doesn't mean that in future they will be able to recover those data as easy as they made. Moreover, let's think about it, that it doesn't mean also that ransomware won't start working in some kind different way. For example, it may firstly affect your local repositories, your local computers, steal credentials from those computers, and after that affects also your remote repositories. And in that scenario, you are left without your source codes. So that's one of the reasons, of course, why you should back up your repositories. There are a few other reasons, but I very often heard that I have repositories on every developer's computers, so right now probably you know why it's not good approach that treating developer's computer as a data backup. Moreover, developers' computer and data that are found there, we should treat as production data. They are constantly changing. We are not sure if they have all repositories on their computer. Usually not. They've got only repositories they are working with. I have never lost any data. Oh, this is so stupid sentence, because if you haven't lost any data so far, it doesn't mean you won't lose those data in the future. And the last sentence, I make copies using scripts, is one of my favorite, because people who said that later on became our customer quite often. So the script approach is not so good. I was talking about scripting on the presentation before, but just to give you the overview, it's a lot of work to be done to create the script which will be reliable, because it's not only about git clone, it's not only about forking your repository, because your Git repository is something more than only source code. And statistics says that backups done manually or over the script are usually half-year old. So let's think right now, if you are restoring your the most valuable data which are half-year old, they are useless for you right now, because we are half year far away from this moment, and everything changes usually. So that's one of the reasons why you shouldn't create your script. Of course, Git copy consists of repos and metadata, as I said before, and at the end scripts are unreliable and require manual maintenance, and we are lazy. We don't want to maintain scripts manually, and moreover, it makes disaster recovery a disaster, a real disaster, because backups must be tested. If you're not testing your backups, if you're not checking if it's recoverable, then you don't have a backup in place, let's be honest. So if you think that, for example, I don't know, GitHub, GitLab, Atlassian with Jira or Bitbucket gives you a data backup, you might be right. You might be right, there is some kind of backup, but they are not responsible for your data. And 3 hours before on the presentation, I've asked people who heard about shared responsibility model, and there were only few hands, just 2 hands raised up. So let me ask this question again. Have you ever heard about shared responsibility model or limited liability? Whoa, more hands we've got raised up already, so I'm glad. But for those who didn't raise their hands, I just would like to let you know that service provider is responsible for hosting of their application, for their availability, for accessibility, but they are not responsible for your data, for its security, for accessing to the data, for who accessing to those data, and those responsibility is on your side. So you have to back up your data properly, otherwise you may get into the trouble. And let me tell you a short story, because we've got one of our potential customers. Unfortunately, he didn't become our customer, but he was affected. Maybe you heard 2 years ago around, or 1 year back, April 2022. So 1 year ago, Jira had quite big issue, quite big problem, and there was a lot of users who lost access to their Jira instances. They were migrating two systems together, and unfortunately some things go wrong. So 2 teams didn't contact each other, and another team removes a lot of instances that shouldn't be removed because they weren't migrated yet. And it causes lack of access to Jira for a lot of customers, and we know the Atlassian customer who lost access to Jira for more than 2 weeks. So for more than 2 weeks, he was not able to continue his business. And why such thing happens? Of course, Atlassian had a backup of this Jira instance as well. But let's be honest, business is all about money, so they've started with recovering instances for the biggest customer, for those who are the most important for them and who paying the most them for their services. So the customer I'm talking about is not as big as the biggest customers that were affected, so he needs to wait more than 2 weeks to get back access to his Jira. What's funny, he's still not convinced that he needs third-party backup for his Jira, and still he thinks that the data backup is on Atlassian, not on his responsibility, and he didn't decide to use any third-party solution to protect his Jira. So let's wait for another outage for him, and let's see what he will say. Another reason why you need to back up your data properly, of course, are some certifications and compliances. If you would like to have some nice looking certificate, you should have a backup in place. So for example, ISO 27 in last year was updated, and there was secure coding section added, which describes everything about how you should create the source code, and also it describes somehow data backup. So the source code also must be backed up regarding the ISO. But still you can say, okay, but ISO is only about the procedures, and if everything is right on the paper, it's okay with ISO because they are not checking that. If we'll take a look at SOC 2 Type 2 certification, the things changed. And I can tell you it from my experience because recently we went through SOC 2 Type 2 certification, and it's impossible to hide anything with this certification. So we have to prove that every control, every procedure we are talking about is already implemented in our company. Otherwise, the auditor won't believe us. So if you would like to have one of those, some nice looking certifications, you must be sure you have the right backup in place. Of course, there are more reasons about that, like human mistakes, like hardware error. About human mistakes, I've got one story I can share with you as well. I don't know if the story is true or not, but this is the story we get from one of our customers. He was traveling with his daughter to holidays, and it was long drive car, so he gave her daughter a phone to play on some games or maybe watch some YouTube videos. I don't care. But when they arrived to the destination a few hours later, he discovered that around 400 GitLab repositories were removed, and he was not able to recover them through GitLab. Hopefully, he had our backup implemented already, so he was able easily to recover everything, and even no one saw that there wasn't repositories, that 400 repositories were deleted. But as I said, I don't know if it's true or not. But if it's not true, it means that the truth is worse than what he told us. So such thing happens. Let's take a look at best backup practices, what we can do to keep our data safe. So first of all, automate. Try to automate everything as much as possible. Why? Because we are lazy. We don't want to check every time if the backup is done properly. We don't want to trigger backup manually, but also we don't want to add new resources to the backup manually, so they should be also included automatically. Better to have more resources in your backup than don't have important repository, for example, that was recently created but not added to your backup policy. So that's why it's very important to automate everything what you can. It's also very important to make your backup quite frequent. Of course, you have to define how often you need to backup your data. You have to define recovery time objective, recovery point objective, but I don't want to make you bored with those definitions. So just to keep in mind, if we are talking, for example, about backup of GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, Jira, or every almost SaaS service, you name it, you should make backup in incremental and differential way, because every cloud service provides API rate limits. Even in our speaker room, I heard that someone was talking about API rate limits. So that's why you cannot fetch every time full data, your full backup, and you should only take the changed part of the data, for example, to not utilize those API rate limits too much. At least. So that's the first best practice. Another one, of course, is to cover all data, because if we are talking about, for example, GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket, it's not only about the source code. Let's take a look, for example, on GitHub. Here you can keep your issues, pull requests, development keys, and there is quite big list of metadata that are stored in each single service. I'm not sure if I've got this list on this presentation, but if you're interested exactly in the metadata that are there, just let me know and I will be glad to share with you those slides as well. It's also very important to keep backup in multiple locations, so let me ask, if you ever heard about 3-to-1 backup rule, please raise your hand if you know this term. Okay, 2 hands raised up. So 3-to-1 backup rule is pretty simple rule, and from my perspective is also very basic rule. So it tells you that you should have 3 copies of your data, 3 copies of your data, 2 in different location and 1 outside of your company. So even if your company or in source location of your data will be destroyed, well, I don't know, burned, flooded, or something else will happen to those data, still in external location you will have copy which is available for you. And that's why you should support multiple different location or the solution you will decide to choose, and also it should have ability to replicate your backups between those storages. Why? Because of API rate limits I just said about. So if there are rate limits and if you will try to fetch the data 3 times from the source, then it will be long as hell. So I don't even want to think how long backup window we will need to keep to make this backup, for example, 3 times. So that's why you should be able to keep backups in multiple locations as well as to replicate. So even if Atlassian, GitLab makes backup of your data, please keep in mind that usually this backup will be on the same server or next to the server your production's data are. And if their data center will move to the cloud, what happens? And probably you heard about OVH data center that have been moved to the cloud, or T-Mobile data center which also moved to the cloud. Then you will realize that your data are not safe. In general, if we are talking about backup, of course we are talking about security, so it's very important to encrypt your data, because still we are talking mostly about your intellectual property. So that's why it's very important to encrypt them. Even if credentials to your storage will be exposed, still no one gets access to the data that are there inside. If we are talking about those DevOps ecosystem, DevOps services backup, then we need also to remember that every solution which is backing up those data must authenticate somehow. So it must use some secrets. And you must be sure that this solution manages those secrets in a secure way that they don't leak. And at the end, we've got immutable backup storage, which works with write once, read many rule. So once your backup will be written on the backup storage, you can be sure it won't be changed, but also it won't be removed until retention period will be met. Effortless management, I said a lot about that all we are humans and or we are lazy, so that's why we need to do a lot to make management of backup ecosystem, backup solution as easy as it's possible, to not require from us too much. So it's good to have some possibility with one take a look to define, to determine if our backups are done successfully or not. It's nice to have access from any place in the world, because right now, today you are on the conference, tomorrow you might be at your office, and from any of those places you would like to have at least opportunity to check if your backup is okay or not. Advanced audit logs are must-have for every system which is related with the security, because you must be able to say what and when happened to your data. And multi-tenant administration, let's be honest, not only one person is managing backups in the company usually. There are way more administrators that are responsible for data backup. And at the end, almost one of the last best practices, which should be the first one. You should think about disaster recovery capabilities, options that are offered or maybe that you want to develop at the very beginning of choosing the backup solution, because this is the most important feature for backup softwares and for backup solutions. Not how it backups your data, but how it restores the data. So first of all, you might have or just make sure that the solution you are choosing allows you to recover repositories, multiple repositories at once, for example, so that you don't need to recover every repository one after another one, because it will take a lot of time and your business will goes down. Of course, you should be also able to restore your repositories to some different service that they comes from. So let's say GitHub goes down, something wrong happened, they've got some outage, and they have sometimes. So you should be able to recover your repositories, for example, to GitLab or to Bitbucket. with backup, everything is to save state of your data in given point in time. So it's also very important to have ability to choose this point in time we would like to restore our data, because they may get encrypted by the ransomware. After that, they can be backed up, and if we'll have possibility to recover only the latest version of our backups, then we restore encrypted data, so we don't have backup at all. And of course, the rest of those disaster recovery features are also very important. I will focus only on the no data overwrite, because it's not so obvious as you may think, and because quite often it's possible to overwrite resources that you are restoring. But if you are in a hurry, if you are in stress situation, you are start clicking or typing like a monkey. So if there is some graphical interface, for example, which we can use to recover your repository, I can tell you how the restore process looks like. It's just selecting repositories, next, recover. That's all. That's all what you will do when there will be such stress situation that, for example, our developers lost access to the to their repos. So that's why you have to be sure that this solution won't allow you to overwrite your repositories by the mistake. And believe me, such thing also happens. So I don't want to say you which solution is the best on the market, even if I'm representing here Git Protect. Usually during such presentations, what I used to say, take a look at the market, because there are just few solutions that are dedicated for DevOps ecosystem backups, including of course Git Protect, and choose the one which suits you the best. Of course, I will be glad if Git Protect will suit you the best, but really choose the solution which will be the best for you. Here I've got slide about architecture and stuff like this, but I don't want to make you bored with this slide. As I said before, this is additional presentation for me, so that's why I've got some slides I'm not going to go so deep into. But with this slide, I just would like to let you know that firstly, we've had Zopr 1, so pretty well backup platform for, let's say, this classic infrastructure backup. And after that, we equipped this professional platform with Git Protect IO, so with this DevOps ecosystems backup capabilities. Git Protect live demo, I'm not going to make right now live demo because I've got less than 5 minutes. So let's head to the Q&A.